Good Vachshvatov. We are back in Baltimore, and we are still discussing Brera. Brera, again, means a retroactive, retroactivity, essentially. Does something work retroactively? And we have all these conflicting statements about different Tanaim saying in one place they seem to hold a Brera, another place they don't seem to hold a Brera. So the last person we have been trying to figure out where they fall in this whole Brera scheme is Rav Shimon. On the one hand, we had a statement where Shimon seemed to say that he holds a brera by Eruvin, and another place where he does not when it comes to purchasing wine. And because of that contradiction, we had an answer given last time we learned, where the suggestion was that there is that to switch them up, that basically we have to change one of them in order to make sure they reconcile because there's a contradiction. But now the Gemara says no, really Rava Amar Rava does hold a brera, Shani Hassam. So why, when it comes to the wine that a person purchases from a kusi, right? The person purchases the wine from kusi, and the person wants to say that the wine that is left over on the bottom of this barrel is going to go retroactively, be considered as if it was mafreshit, as if I was taking it to give meiser. And so why doesn't that work? Shani Hassam dina rashis sheshioreha nikarim. The pasuk describes truma as rashis, the first. First sounds like it's first as opposed to the second, meaning it's distinct. It has to be really distinct. So when you have a barrel of wine of all this food, it's not because brera doesn't work. It's something unique about taking truma that has to be distinct, and over here it's not going to be distinct. Amalei Baya. So Baya says if that's so, this person has two pomegranates which are teva. Okay, the Amar, and the person says this funny statement. He says, "Yerdu gishamim hayom yezet truma al zeh." Person just like a betting man or whatever. Person says, if it rains today, this pomegranate over here is going to be truma for this other one. In other words, again, both of them are here, both of them are tevel. One of them has to ultimately become truma to give to the Kohen, and the other one's now going to be able to be eaten. So he says, if it rains today, then this one is going to be truma on this one over here. Okay? If it doesn't rain today, then this one's going to be truma for this one. Why? What? Doesn't matter. This is what the person does. Okay? So it says the Gemara, whether the rain falls or whether not doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, there's no really distinction between them. They're really, the remaining portion, they're all sitting, the pomegranates are sitting in front of you. And if you want to say that indeed it is the case, the declaration is ineffective, that's not taught in the Mishnah that it is effective. Why? The pasuk says, the Mishnah says, person says, Truma, this pile and its meiser portions, besocho, that are within it, Trumas meiser zeh, besocho, and person has a pile of meiser and says, Trumas meiser of this pile is designated within the pile's midst, right? So person has a pile of stuff, and he says within this pile there's going to be something which is going to be for meiser or for Trumas meiser. Rabbi Shimon Omer Kara Hashem. It actually works. Okay, so we see that even when the truma is not distinguishable from the remaining portions, it does indeed work. So why, when it comes to the wine, and you just told me the reason that by wine, it's nothing to do with brera, the reason Rav Shimon says it doesn't work is because of rashis. Yet we have a Mishnah over here where he says explicitly when it comes to truma, that even though something is indistinguishable, you have a pile of produce, and you're going to say part of it is going to go for Trumas Meiser, and yet he says it does work over there, and so clearly you don't need ratios, you don't need to be distinguishable. Shani Hasam Dikas Savivav. The Gemara says, when it comes to a pile of produce, there is a distinction. When it comes to a barrel of wine, it all gets, you pull the wine this way, the wine is going back and forth, it's all liquid, it's all continuous. There's nothing really separating. When it comes to a pile of produce, there you have the stuff on the perimeters. And so you say, if this part over here is going to be separate from this part, it really is separate. When it comes to dry goods, if you have a pile over here, this stuff, my pinky over here, and you say this is going to be truma, this means I'm going to separate for truma, that is distinct. Granted, it's all part of a continuous item, but at the end of the day, this is really, at the end of the day, distinct, as opposed to when you have a barrel of wine there's nothing really that's separate, and therefore it doesn't work. And therefore, the Gemara is saying, really, Rav Shimon does hold of truma. Really, Rav Shimon does hold of brera. The reason he does not seem to hold a brera in the case of the truma, of the wine, is because when he buys it from the kusi is because the fact has to be ratios, be distinct, and that's why it doesn't work. By saying another possible answer to say that really Rav Shimon does hold a brera. So why, in the case of the wine from the kusin, does he not agree? The Bryce itself, if you read the Bryce itself gives a reason. It says Amr Lo Rameir, there Rav Yosef Rav Shimon said to Rameir. Rameir said the declaration of truma is valid. Right, he says the stuff that's left over is valid. Rav Shimon responds to him, the flask might break. It is not a good plan. He says, granted, you want to say, okay, when it's left over, it's going to be used for truma. But what happens in the case when the flask breaks open and then the truma falls to the ground and you were never able to separate it and give it to the Kohen, and now you went ahead and you retroactively ate tevel. So that's the reason Rav Shimon says it's a problem. Nothing to do with not holding retroactivity. The problem is over here you have something in a flask, and a flask is not perfect, and a flask could break, a flask could fall, a flask could spill, and therefore Rav Shimon rejects it not because he doesn't hold a brera, but rather because he holds there's a concern that it might spill out. So Rav Meir responds, Rav Meir says, I don't have to worry about that. When it cracks, we'll worry about it. But right now, I don't have to worry about it. So the Gemara says, wait a second. Now that we have that brisa, light is like a daita meikar in reisha shishir nikarin, my karmile. Now that you've shown me this brisa, which says that the reason Rav Shimon rejects this is because he's afraid the barrel might spill. What were you talking about before, where you said that Rav Shimon said the issue is because it has to be a first, it has to be distinguishable? He just says what the reason is. It's because it might spill, and therefore, if it spills, he's never going to have a chance to take off the truma. So Gemara says, Haki Karmelei. This is what, according to the first answer, Rabba's first answer, this is what the way to read the brisa. Lididan be'ina reishis shashir nikarin. According to us, the truma separation is invalid because we require a first, right, and it has to be separate, and that's why it doesn't work. However, Lididach, according to Yura Meir, who clearly disagrees with that point, Yatamoda, granted you don't hold you need a rachis, but don't you reach Mibaka Hanod, don't you hold that the flask may possibly spill or split, and therefore he's going to be drinking Tevel retroactively? To that he responds when it breaks. Okay, so the bottom line is one. So we have a couple of different ways how to reconcile and say Rav Shimon really does hold of Breira. It's just that there's something unique about the case of the Krusim. New Mishnah. Okay, a couple of words of introduction to this Mishnah. First of all, there is a notion we've spoken about before, and that is that a person can have one residency on Shabbos. One residency. I don't care how many homes you have. I don't care how many places you stay. The bottom line is, when it comes to the laws of Erev Tchumen, you have one place. So for me and you, I didn't set up Erev Tchumen this past Shabbos, so I have it. So my home is here in Baltimore, and I have 2,000 amos all around the circumference of Baltimore. When you ever get to the city edge, I have 2,000 amos all around it. Okay? Now, if I wanted to go towards, some other city, towards my, to the east, and therefore I went ahead and I put an Erev in the east, then I'm able to go only in that direction, right? I can't go in other directions. Now I've established my residency in that direction. Excuse me. So I go and I place the Erev Tchumen within 2,000 amos, and now I have 2,000 amos, so I'm able to go from the city to that Erev, but I have 2,000 amos circumference around that Erev, right? And therefore, I can't go to the west of the city or the north of the city, the south of the city, because the city is no longer my residency. So one other piece to keep in mind, and that is that everyone agree you can't go ahead and set up an Erev Tchumen on one side of the city, the east of the city, and say for the first, and then set one up on the west side of the city and say, for the first half of Shabbos, I'm going to be able to go to the east, and the second half of Shabbos, I'm going to go to the west. No. You have a residency for Shabbos. Okay, with that in mind, let's see Abach Lokas in our Mishnah. Yom Tov Hasamach LaShabbos. Let's see, you have Yom Tov, which falls out next to Shabbos. Whether Yom Tov falls on Friday or Sunday. Marav Mishnah Eruvin, a person allowed to make two Eruvin on opposite sides of the city. But Omer and say, Eruv B'Rishon LeMizrach. May Eruv on the first day, whether it's Friday or whether it's Shabbos, whatever the first day is, it's going to be to the east. Especially Marav on the second day, it's going to be to the west. Or Barishon Lamar V'Shin Mizrach on the first day is going to be to the west, and the second day it's going to be to the east. Eruve Barishon V'Shin Kivnei Iri. Or my Erev for the first day, I have an Erev for the first day, but the second day I'm like the residents of the city who do not have an Erev, and therefore I have again the 2,000 amos right around the city. Or Eruve V'Sheni Barishon Kivnei Iri, where I can say my Erev is for the second day, but the first day I'm like the residents of the city. No. Omar of the Rachachas or Eno Erev. Omar of the Rachachas or Eno Ma'arav Kalekar. Whether a person can either make an Erev on one side of the city for both days, or no Erev at all. You have to be consistent. Do you have an Erev? It's going to be for Friday and Shabbos, or for Shabbos and Sunday. No Erev across the board. Either person makes an Erev for both days, or he makes no Erev at all. Now, those words are a little repetitive. The Gemara is going to come and explain what exactly I mean by repeating it, but the bottom line is they are disagreeing with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says you can make one Erev for the Yom Tov day, one Erev for the Shabbos day, and the Chacham say no, when the two are side by side, you cannot do such a thing. Keitzad Yaseh. So what should you do? Says the Chamim, because there's a concern over here. It's a concern if I have an Erev for 2 days. Let's say I want to go to the east of the city. I put my Erev to the east of the city, and there's a concern that it's going to be eaten after I start my Erev, right? So normally I have, let's say I go on, Friday afternoon, right before Shabbos, I put my Erev down, and all I have to know is assume that it was there for, an extra hour until Shabbos began, I'm good to go, right? Because once it was there when Shabbos began, it's fine. But over here, it has to be not just when Shabbos began, it has to be all the way the next day, because it's 2 days in a row. So you need to have the Erev has to be there for both days. So what do? Bring it there on the first day. Again, so let's say Yom Tov is Friday. So that means Thursday night Yom Tov starts. Go there Thursday right before Yom Tov begins. And wait there until dark. Right? Once it's there till dark, you don't have to leave it there. Bring it back home. Then the second day on Friday afternoon, go there. Bring the food to the same location. Stay there until dark. And then you're allowed to eat it. because you don't need anymore. Once it was there, once it was nightfall, you don't have to eat anymore. You benefit from your walking. I mean, you're allowed to walk in that direction 2,000 amos on the second day as well. And you benefit from the Eruv, meaning you use the same food of the Eruv twice. Fantastic. Okay, the Chum continue. Nechal b'rishon. If the Eruv gets eaten on the first day, Eruv l'rishon, the Eruv is only good for the first day. And Eruv l'sheni, there's no Eruv is not good for the second day because the second is independent of the first day and requires its own Eruv, right? So the Chum again say, if the Eruv got eaten, let's say you put it out for Thursday night leading into Friday, and the Eruv was eaten after nightfall, so it's still good for Friday, because once Shabbos began with the Eruv, it's good for all that day, but it's not going to be good for Shabbos. Amr lahem, Rav Eliezer, this is, wait a second, Maidim atem li shehin shnei kedushos. So according to you, the fact that you are saying that the Eruv that got eaten on Friday is not going to be okay for Shabbos, then that means that Friday and Shabbos are two distinct days. If they are indeed two distinct days, the term shtei kedushos, then why do you disagree with me? If you hold they're really two distinct days, then why can't you do like I say, like put one Eruv to the east, one Eruv to the west, and say day 1 to the east, day 2 to the west? They're two separate days. Why is it that you, the Chum, hold that you can't do that? Okay, that's the Gemara's question. So that's the Gemara further. Says the Gemara. The Gemara first now challenge. We're going to answer the question according to the Chachamim, but first we're going to have to address the double terminology in our Mishnah. When the Mishnah said, the Chachamim say the Eruv must be placed on one side of the city, what does this mean? L'shnei yamin, for 2 days. L'shnei yamin. Then the Gemara said further, for 2 days. Ma'anihu, as a reference to l'ruach achas, in one direction. Hanukkah, it's the same statement. In other words, they're repeating themselves. So hachi garmei le the Rabban le Rabbi Eliezer. Really, the Mishnah has, if you read the Mishnah correctly, although it's not so clear, what it's doing is the Chachamim are pointing out why they disagree with the Rabbi Eliezer. They say, Yetz Amud, don't you, Rabbi Eliezer, agree? Don't you agree, Rabbi Eliezer, that you can't make an Eruv on one day, half of the day I'm allowed to go to the north, half of the day I'm allowed to go to the south, I'm allowed to go. He says, yes, I agree. So he says, just so you can't do it for one day, just so you can't do one day, half the day towards the south, half the day to the south. So too, when it's Friday and Shabbos, Yom Tiv on Shabbos, or Shabbos and Yom Tiv, you also can't do it for 2 days. Yom Echel Mizrach, Yom Echel Marav, one to the east and one to the west. So as Rabbi Eliezer respond, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer says, wait, are you talking about? There's a different thing. In the case of one Shabbos, I can't go half the day to the north, half the day to the south, because it's one day. And therefore, whatever the Eruv was for when the day began, if it's throughout the whole day. Over here, it's 2 Kedushos, it's 2 separate days. There is Yom Tov and there's Shabbos, and therefore you could do this way. So, HaChadesh Kedushos, and therefore it's 2 separate periods of holiness, and therefore it's not a problem. Okay, so it sounds like right now, and this is where our assumption is the Chachamim hold that when Shabbos and Yom Tov are together, we treat it as one span of holiness, and Rabbi Eliezer holds no, it's 2 spans of holiness. So the Chachamim hold it's one span of holiness, and that's why they say you cannot have, just like on one Shabbos, you can't split it down the middle. So too, for Shabbos Yom Tov, Yom Tov Shabbos, you can't split it down the middle. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it's 2 separate things, and therefore it's not splitting down the middle. One Eruv for one day, one Eruv for the other. Okay, now we have a brisa. Rabbi Eliezer says like this. Yeah, don't you agree? Shem Eruv b'raglam ben rishon. If you make an Eruv with on the first day, you have to go back on the second day, right? We saw in the Mishnah. The Chachamim said that you bring the Eruv to the place, let's say it's Yom Tiv Shabbos. So you bring the Eruv to the place on Thursday, going into Friday, and then once it gets dark, you go back home. And then you come back again on Friday, and you bring the Eruv, and it goes into Shabbos, right? So you have to go back again for the second day. And also, you told us in the Mishnah, if the Eruv is eaten on the first day, and Yotzei Alav Yom Sheni, then you can't use the Eruv for the day 2. You can use it for the rest of the day 1, but you can't use it for day 2. Amar Laval, they said, yes, it's true. So he says, Halai Shtei Kedushasein. Then you have to agree that there are 2 separate periods of holiness. In other words, what's going on over here? You, the Chachamim, were saying that the reason you're not able to, the Chum are saying, the reason that you can't have an Eruv to the east, Eruv to the west, because it's one long span of Kedusha, it's not true. Because if it's one span of Kedusha, then all you should need is one Eruv in the beginning of, Thursday night going into Friday, because Friday and Shabbos are one holiness. And if it was true, it's one holiness, then it's one span of Kedusha, like you, the Chum, say. Then if the Eruv is eaten on Friday night after nightfall, then it should still be just like it's good for Friday, it's good for Shabbos, because it's one long span of Kedusha. So it says, Rabbanan Spukim Sakel, no. Rabbi Eliezer knows definitively that it's 2 separate days. The Rabbanan, they're not sure. And therefore they can have stringencies in both directions. On the one hand, they're strict, and they say that maybe it's 2 separate, maybe it's one day, and because it's one day, I can't have an Eruv in one direction and then an Eruv in the other direction, just like I can't split up one day, and I have to treat these 2 days like they're one day. At the same time, maybe it's 2 days, and that's why the Chum make you come back each day, and that's why you need an Eruv for each day. Okay, now the Gemara continues. The Brisa, Amru, and in this Brisa we have the Chum now responding to Rabbi Eliezer. Amru lo Eliezer, the Chum said to Rabbi Eliezer, yeah, Tamoda, don't you agree? Shema Arvim Matchil Miyom Tov Shabbos, that you cannot make an Eruv on. So in Sunnah we're talking about making an Eruv on Thursday for Friday and Shabbos, right? So don't you agree that you're not allowed to initially make the Eruv on Yom Tiv for Shabbos? Let's say Friday is being Yom Tiv. I'm allowed to vote. I agree. So halav kedusha achasi. So don't you see that if you cannot make one on Yom Tov, meaning if there are really two separate days like you or Eliezer are holding, are of the opinion of, then why can't I make an Eruv on Friday, which is Yom Tov, for Shabbos? Why do I have to make them both before Shabbos? Doesn't that imply that it's one Kedusha? Where it says, Eliezer has mishum achana. No, it's nothing to do with it. The reason you can't go from Friday, can't set up an Eruv on Friday for Shabbos is because preparation for Shabbos, which you cannot do on Yom Tov unless you have an Eruv Tavshilin. So assuming we don't have Eruv Tavshilin, and that's why you can't set it up on Yom Tov for Shabbos, but it has nothing to do with the fact that it's two separate days. Nothing to do with the fact that it's one day. Really, it is two separate days, and really theoretically, you should be able to set it up on Friday, which is Yom Tov for Shabbos. Just the problem is Hachana, preparing from one day to the next, and that is all. We'll pick up tomorrow. Have a great day.